I can't even tell you how magnificent this is. I would like to introduce the movement that is Beck, and she will be talking about becoming an agent of change, and it is my profound honor and delight to introduce Beck Tench.
Come on, guys.
Can you hear me okay? Is my mic on?
No.
I think the battery's
Hello? It's on? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, now? Is it still okay? I tried to put my sweater earlier. Maybe there it is. Good morning. Okay, so, yeah, that's a lot better. Great. So, this is my 5th time in Springfield, my 4th ILEADU. I want to start my talk with kind of telling you why I keep coming back or why I'm here. It sort of started with meeting Ann Craig on a super shuttle in Denver at a WebWise. She had heard me speak and she had just gotten the grant and asked me to come. And I came, and what happened was I experienced a lot of resonance with the participants. And that's happened every year since. And so that's why I'm here, is to share with you some stories about myself and about my work. I've been given a unique opportunity to be a change agent at a museum in North Carolina, and I've learned a few things through that I think people, especially librarians, have found resonant. Does anybody play the guitar? A little bit. So, what's that?
I said I wish I did.
I wish you did. Well, my mom taught me how to play the guitar, and one of the things that I had a problem with is that I don't hear pitch very well, and so, or differences in pitch. And so she taught me that I could actually see pitch, because what happens when you're tuning a guitar is if you play a string in the same chord as another string, the chord will start to vibrate if it hears itself. And so you can actually look at the strings of the guitar and see resonance. And so I say that to say that I'm going to suggest a lot of things today that you might be able to do in your personal and professional lives, habits and strategies. And some of them may resonate, make you buzz inside. And if they do, that's awesome, take note of it. And some of them won't. And if they don't, that's awesome, take note of it. Okay? So that's sort of one of the contracts I want to make. The other contract has to do with the warning. And that is that over the next 45 minutes, as we have this talk, there's some sharky waters ahead. Specifically, there are sharks, I'm going to ask you to do some things, or at least invite you to, that you don't know what you're doing. Or a shark like you're not smart or creative or insightful enough to do these things. Or if you fail, you'll be ridiculed by others or by people that you really care about. And I have to tell you that it's been my sole experience in life to feel these things daily, and including right this minute. I feel those things. I feel these sharks are swimming with them. But so far, it's been my experience that these aren't actually sharks, that it's just me, and I'm wearing a shark suit, and I'm freaking myself out. But the reality of the situation is that if I just kind of go out in faith that that's the case and push past it, there's some real change and movement that can happen as a result. So that's the contract I want us to make. Okay, so I want to start with a little bit of context, give you a couple of stories that tell you kind of who I am and how I have come to approach these philosophies, just so that you're aware of that, since we haven't had a chance to really get to know each other yet. Do people know the poet Mary Oliver? Isn't she wonderful? If you don't know her, I highly recommend giving her a read. And recently, she's been writing a lot of poems and essays about dogs. And one specifically that really spoke to me was one called Dog Talk. And she talks about how dogs live kind of uniquely in two worlds. They live in the domestic world. They're like totally domestic animals that can make promises and contracts with you. And then they live in the wild world, where they just completely forget all those promises and chase the squirrel or go after the thing. The dogs live as both domestic and wild, and they promise and then they forget. And when I read that, I thought, humans, we live in two worlds too. We live in this world where we have like moments of wisdom and insight into who we are and where we fit, and then we get distracted by something and we totally forget that. And so these are, this story that I'm about to tell is sort of a story of that, of realizing something very, very profoundly and then totally forgetting it. So let me tell you a little bit about the job that I've had at this museum, the Science Museum in Durham, North Carolina. It's called the Museum of Life and Science. It's a 80-acre kind of zooseum. We've got live animals and a traditional science center. And I never intended to work at a science museum. I was a designer and a writer and a journalist. That was my sort of background. And in my early career, I just went through a series of jobs with web stuff, information architecture, and that kind of stuff, and kind of got a little bored. And I told everybody that I could think of, I'm feeling bored. I'm not happy with where I am. I want something where I have a lot of freedom and I really care about what I do. And I had a friend who connected me with the museum, and they had been given this really bizarre grant by the IMLS to study what would happen if you hired somebody you normally wouldn't hire to do something you normally wouldn't do. What happens to the institutional culture? And so basically, on my first day, whenever I was hired, they told me if I didn't fail, they'd actually be disappointed in me. That it was my job to do things that had never been done, and if I didn't fail, that meant I wasn't doing things that had never been done before. And so I don't know about you, if you sort of sit in your chair right now and you think, okay, what if that were me? What would I do if I was told I have to fail? That I wasn't even, that it wasn't just okay, it was encouraged. How do you even start? And I didn't know what to do. In fact, I felt completely in the dark and lost, and I was just a little paralyzed actually as to how to even start that process. And then this is this Mary Oliver moment where I remembered something that I'd already realized before. And I realized that I had actually made change in my own life, and I had failed a lot at trying to make that change, and I had persisted through that failure. And that there may be some things that I could learn from that in my job. So this is a picture of me when I was an undergrad in college, and it was my 21st birthday, and I decided shortly thereafter to change my life. And it was a very, very small decision. It was drink more water every day. And I tried to do that, and then that turned into eat a better breakfast and go for a run or whatever, right? But it was a very long process of trying things and failing at them, but keeping on trying. And I think that two of the philosophies that I took from that experience into my work right now is one, if you want to be something, live like that. So for me, all throughout this, if I want to be a healthy person, live like a healthy person. What would a healthy person read? What would a healthy person do? And the same goes for all this stuff that I'm going to suggest today. These are habits, practices, and ways that creative change makers live. And the other, which is equally as important, is that small changes over time turn into big changes. And that's the story I'm going to tell and retell today. Everything, including the drawings up here, are very small little risks that have been taken and turned into bigger things. I think that you could break down almost everything I do in life into that philosophy. And it is the key to being able to fail is to make something doable so that you can actually, it's less scary, and then failable so that if you fail at it, it's not devastating. And I also feel it's important to just make a quick disclaimer, because I feel it's a particular vulnerability of this talk. And that is that this isn't about being a better something. It's not about being a better librarian or a better person or a better writer or anything like that. I remember distinctly when I learned in grade school the superlative of good, because I thought it was going to be good, good, or goodest, and it's good, better, best. And I think that inherent in that is if you want to be better at something, you're not good enough already. And I'm like absolutely 100% certain that everybody here is totally good enough right this second. You're done. You're done being better. And I just want to say that these habits are about living with intention. They're not about bettering yourself. Okay, so we're going to get to the habits that I've been talking about. And the first one is to draw. So I want to just take a quick poll. Raise your hand if you feel like you're a good drawer, and keep your hand up. And then look around the room and see who around you, your peers, feel good about them. Okay? That's actually quite a lot of people compared to some audiences.
Yeah.
Okay, now I would like you to raise your hand if you've ever, at any point in your life, been 5 years old. Awesome. Okay, look around the room. As we saw with Ella's rainbow book yesterday, right? When you're 5 years old, you can draw. Yeah. This is part of what you do. And somewhere along the way, we lose it. Most of us, not all of us, apparently. And you can get back there. Drawing is super important. I think one of the reasons why I encourage it so much is because there are some things that we can't say in words, that we need shapes to tell. This is a visual vocabulary. With these shapes here, you can draw anything that could ever be drawn. Just practice drawing these shapes and you can draw bigger things. Just like with these shapes, you can write anything that could ever be written. It is just a way to communicate. And sometimes we need these shapes to understand how we think about things or to communicate how we think about things to others. So what I want to do is get you started with taking a little bit of a risk right now. So there's a thing in your binder. It's a piece of paper. You don't have to use that piece of paper if you have another blank sheet of paper around. But what I'd like you to do is take a sheet of paper and draw a squiggle on it. And the squiggle doesn't need to look like this, but a squiggle is just point A to point B without lifting your pen or pencil, something, free form. Yes, Andy has a beautiful squiggle. All right, now once you've drawn your squiggle,
Okay, yeah, hang on. I gotta get a pen. Okay. I usually like to squiggle like that. Isn't that beautiful? She's doing more interactive. This one's squiggle, I think.
Oh wait, what she said?
Pass it to the left. What did you say? To the left? Okay.
For the next little while, I would like you to turn your squiggle into a robot.
A robot?
A robot.
A robot. And I don't care that you're not a squiggle bee and that you're not looking at the slides. Studies have shown that you're actually taking more information whenever you're doodling, so I think that's totally fine. And all these slides are online, and even the whole video, the whole presentation's online. So no worries, you're not going to miss anything critical. So I want to tell you a little bit about the story of where the squiggle game came to be. So, as I said, I started at this museum, and I was hired specifically because I wasn't a science-y or a museum-y person. And how to then make change, and particularly my job was to get people to take more risks. How to do that in a place where I didn't know anything about how they did anything was pretty tricky. And so, our museum has 70 to 80 employees, and I thought they have the answers that I need on what change needs to happen and how we can turn those changes into projects. But I can't meet with every one of them. And every one of them probably has some value and input. So what I started to do was hold office hours. And so I would hold them at the bar on Friday night. And so I would text and tweet, I'm headed to the Pinhook, join me, because the Pinhook was the name of this bar that we would go to. And people would come. And every time we came, from very early on, we would draw. So this is the very first drawing that we did at the Pinhook, and it's just a bar napkin, And what I did was I called it napkin tennis, where I would draw something and then pass it, and they would draw something and pass it and draw, and just back and forth until we had a drawing. And that was very cool. But as the group grew larger, what I started to do was pass around my sketchbook. And so I always had a sketchbook with me, and I would pass it around. We did this the other night with the apprentices at Lindsay's, I think is the bar in the hotel. And we just passed a piece of paper around to the whole group, and everybody contributes to the drawing. And the drawings would look something like this. Sort of non sequitur, people would be just drawing things that they were comfortable drawing. But at the same time, they were still drawing, just like you're drawing right now, right? Still taking a risk. And then I started structuring it a little bit more. I started this one with how to throw a good party and put some spokes off of it. And people had to think of a way to conceptualize of something and then try to draw that, which is a little bit more risky. Until one day it turned into the squiggle game. And this was the very first squiggle. And this was the robot that it turned into. I love it. So why I was doing this was because I met this man, Paul Martin, who creates exhibits for the Science Museum in Minnesota. And he talks about exhibits as places where people are safe and smart, that you need to create an environment where people feel safe and smart in order for them to open up their brains enough to be able to learn. And so what I was trying to do with the pen hook was create a space for my colleagues to feel safe and smart taking small risks, to practice trying something and failing at it, to practice trying something at all. And after we had done the pen hook for a couple of years, I opened that up to an actual work practice, and I created this board called, I had a project called the Innovation Fund. And I created a board and said, if you want to share your idea and have it funded, you have to draw on a bar napkin what the idea is. And so people would draw different ideas. And then that turned into this thing that we did with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology called Feeder Sketch. Cornell has a lot of citizen science projects, and one of their projects is watching birds in the backyard and counting them so that climate scientists can study the migratory patterns of birds. So what we did was we said, well, if you're counting them and you're looking at them, let us teach you how to draw them at the same time. And so we had these people all from 9 years old to 63 years old, of all levels of birding knowledge and drawing capability, sign up to learn how to draw birds with us. And you'll see here some of the drawings. All different levels. And at the end of this, we had hundreds of drawings of birds. And what we realized, which was so cool, was that as a science museum, your mission is to get people to slow down and notice the world. But if you're not like at a meditation retreat, asking people to do that's not going to work. And what awesomely happens when you ask someone to draw something, especially a living thing that is as fickle as a bird, is they slow down and notice the world. So it became this way to achieve our mission that we never would have done. We would have never done this had it not been for the drawing practices that were started at the pen hook. So that's some suggestions, invitations for you to try at work or at home. One is to play napkin tennis at the bar or the coffee shop. Just see what happens if you take a colleague and you bounce a piece of paper between the two of you. Or play the squiggle game after dinner one night with your family. Draw something without looking at the page. There's in your handout on the back of it, there's some books that I recommend, and one of them is called The Zen of Seeing. It's by Frederick Frank. And he has an activity that he articulates in there where you basically go and you don't look at your piece of paper and you just draw what you see. And it's amazing what you see whenever you try to draw it without looking at it. And then carry around a good pen. I always have a pen right here, and it's always really fancy, so that, love fancy things, but so that when I'm bored, I can draw. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to do. So, give those things a try. The next thing I'm going to ask you to do is to write, or invite you to do is to write. And it's a very specific type of writing. Has anyone heard of morning pages? Yeah, a few people, good. Morning pages is from a book called The Artist's Way. It's Julia Cameron wrote the book. I think that the greatest offering of the book is this one activity, so I would suggest you can download a PDF of this and kind of get the gist of the book. And it is taking 3 pieces of paper and filling them with stream of consciousness writing every morning. And whenever you're done, you can throw them away if you want to. The point of the activity is to exhaust the logical part of your brain so that you can get into some clear, still, focused, creative space. And it's been my experience that that by page 3, I'm there. And it takes me probably about 45 minutes to do it every morning. This is what I do. I can't throw mine away because I'm far too narcissistic for that, but you're not supposed to go and revisit them. It's because if you do that, it becomes a different sort of journaling. So what I do is I put them in an envelope and I date the envelope and I just put them in a stack. And that is I think that's a fine way of going about it too. But don't do it in a notebook where you might revisit it. It's a different kind of thing. Another point that I want to stress with the morning pages that I've learned is that it's really important to write them down instead of type them. It takes me about 15 minutes to type 1,000 words, and it takes me about 45 minutes to write that amount. And in that passing of time, that clarity comes that does not come in the time it takes to just type. So I think it really does matter to handwrite. So give morning pages a try. It's not for everyone. Another couple of suggestions for using writing. Once you get this once you start writing morning pages, you will have a sort of an inward voice going that you can use other places. So one of the things that I do is I write stream of consciousness is whenever I need to tackle a problem, so that I don't, it gets me a way to start. It's that whole thing I was talking about with like having a small thing that you can do. It's a small thing. It's a small way for me to solve the problem without solving the problem completely, is a way, just a tool to write a stream of consciousness, to figure out how I'm feeling about it, what I'm scared of. And then I have a folder in my computer called Shitty First Drafts. This is a phrase from Anne Lamott from Bird by Bird, which is also an excellent book. And everything I do goes into Shitty First Drafts first, and it gives me the permission to not have anything edited and polished, and to not censor myself while I'm writing, which I think is really important. For just getting to a space where we can be very open with our approaches to things. Twyla Tharp, Creative Habits. Anybody know her? It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend the whole thing. So I've talked to a lot of people about this, from high schoolers to retired, and nobody has come to me afterwards and said, "Thank you so much. I was looking for something to do for 45 minutes every morning." Most people feel that they're like way too busy to fit this in, and I understand that. And it is about priorities. It's also about the structure of your life. But one tool that I found super helpful for me in my life is to create ritual around this. Twyla talks about ritual as a way for us to understand things we don't. That humans use ritual to understand love and death and God. And we also can use it to understand creativity. So Twyla's ritual, she gets up like 5:30 in the morning, puts on her workout clothes, goes down to a street corner in Manhattan, hails a cab, and goes to the gym. None of these things have anything to do with choreography, but they get her to a place where she will create. And her ritual is complete when she hails that cab. She knows if she hails that cab, she's going to go on and do the creative practice that she needs to do. So I have my own ritual. My ritual has changed over the years. I've drawn this slide many times because it keeps changing. Right now, my ritual is I wake up in the morning and I do a little bit of gratitude journaling. I take gummy vitamins, which are awesome. It totally changes my life. It's so good. And I have a hand crank coffee grinder, and I crank the coffee grinder while the kettle is going. I try to time it so that they're done right at the same time. And then I make coffee and I write my pages. And I'm going to write pages if I do this step right here. It's just what happens. You just get into a habit. And so think about your own life, because we all have rituals already, actually. There are things that already happen. We have to walk the dog, Maybe there's something, that you do every morning with your coffee, I don't know. But ritualize your morning, play with that. See if you can put some habit into it that will lead you to a productive or creative activity like morning pages. But it doesn't have to be morning pages. It could be anything contemplative, like going on a walk or meditating or reading something. I really encourage us all to avoid looking at our phones or our email or our computers for the first 30 minutes of the day. Because what happens in that first glance, when you find out that nothing happened at all, is that you get that kick of dopamine. And it starts the cycle of needing another one. And it's not the reward of information, it's the reward of knowing that you get. And the later we start that cycle, the more we can do with that focus. So I think it's really important. Along those lines, there are a couple of hacks I've added into my home and phone to give me some less distraction time. And one of them is to buy a little light timer that people use whenever they go on vacation, and I plug my cable modem into it. And so my cable modem will turn off. I work from home. It'll turn off at 6 o'clock at night, and it turns back on at around 9 or 10 in the morning, depending. And so when it turns off, I don't have the internet anymore. And it's really wonderful because I don't have the burden of knowing just constantly available to me. Another thing that I've done is I've totally made my smartphone a dumb phone, except it's got a really great camera. So I took Safari off my phone, I took Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff off my phone so that it doesn't call to me. And in moments of boredom, I can go to the fancy pen I have instead of to the phone and get that other hit. So try these things. Make your smartphone boring. If you need help figuring out how to turn Safari off, because it's kind of hard, I will help you figure that out. And also encourage you to just try it, because it's super easy to restate all that stuff. Plug your modem into a timer. Buy a real alarm clock. That totally changed my life, because I used to I thought, when I first got an iPhone, I thought, why don't alarm clocks work this way? Like I set it once and I never have to worry about remembering the alarm. But it requires you to look at that thing first thing, and there's going to be notifications there. So I bought a real alarm clock. It made a huge difference. And I also turned vibrate off on my phone so that whenever I silence it, it doesn't bother me at all. And that has made a huge difference in being able to say no to the distraction machine that's sitting in all of our pockets. And then the last thing that I want to encourage you to do is to get solitude. And this applies to the extroverts as well. I think that it's critically important for us whenever we're making these habits of trying to just find the clarity we need to solve the problems that we're trying to solve, that we have some time alone. I don't mean time like in the morning writing morning pages. I mean some big chunks. So what I have started to do is to go on an occasional retreat where I go away for 2 or 3 days all by myself. I don't see anybody else, and I go through just some habits of thinking and reflecting. I got this idea from my friend Anton, and before I went on my first one, I asked him, do you have any sort of lessons learned or recommendations for how I could spend my time? And he said he did. He had 2 formulas, RED plus RWR. To get good sleep, eat well, and exercise. And to then go through reading, writing, and reflecting. So I do actually reading, writing / drawing, and reflecting. And what I've discovered in this simple formula is that if you go off and you have this sort of intention to spend some time, this structure here is enough to make you feel productive without having a list of to-dos. So it's just a really lovely flow of taking some good books, taking plenty of canvas, whatever your canvas of choice is, and then spending some time reflecting, and just do that cycle over and over and over again for however many days. And it's just a wonderful, it's a gift that you can give yourself. So I recommend doing that. I also have a good friend, Howard, who says if you want to have big ideas, you need to get into big spaces. And we're actually going to do some of that in June. Whenever we come back together, we're going to get outside to think, because I think it's really important. But whenever you're tackling a big problem, we got we've got walls and boundaries and ceilings here, it can be really advantageous to get outside, and even more so to get into nature, so that we can have the clarity and space we need to think through those problems. So please consider reserving a long weekend by yourself. Just give yourself that gift, see what happens. And go outside the next time you want to think through a challenging problem, see if there's any differences you experience. Okay. So I'm about to transition into how did I deal with others, because this is all like internal stuff, and there was a whole culture to it and to influence. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But I want to check in with your drawings for a second. And I'd like you to pass your squiggle, your robot now, to another person. And what I want you to do is, I did this at Michigan State. And
I don't know. Yours? Oh, thank you.
what you're responsible for is,
Because some of us didn't have them down here.
No, I don't.
okay. What I want you to do is to finish the drawing. And what I mean by that is I want you to add something to it. Add a call to action, add an inspirational quote, add a title, whatever you want to do. And if you're so inclined, I invite you to then hide it as you go throughout the campus today, somewhere where you think a student will find it. And so share something about this, something about what you're learning, something with someone else, and go hide it. And if you also are so inclined, tell the person to hashtag don't mind the robot, and let's see if they pick it up and tweet about it. Don't mind the robot? Don't mind the robot, no apostrophe.
Oh.
All one word. I did this at Michigan State totally on a whim, and there were some students that found it, and it was kind of cool, so I want to see what happens here at UIS. So, like I said, I was told to fail, have a failure portfolio, all this stuff, and that's one thing, and sort of what I was talking about before, like with the inward trajectory of what you've got to do to accept something like that. But then, how do you get others to feel like it's okay for them to fail, and it's actually good? And I think that requires that you have to redefine failure, which is super easy whenever you work for a science museum. But conceptually, I think you have to redefine failure and make it less about failure as this sort of metaphorical concrete block that you just sort of fall flat on your face and it feels devastating and painful. And failure more like a trampoline, where when you fall, you bounce back using the momentum of that fall. Because if there's anything I've learned over the last 6 years, it's about what science is. And I didn't know at all what science was before. I thought it was like facts and a scientific method process thing. But science is just noticing the world around you, and this beautiful definition, willingness to accept what you find and a willingness to discover that you're wrong. And if we were to start to look at failure and remove ourselves from what we're doing and say, I'm going to try this thing, I'm going to observe what happens, and then I'm going to be open to if it doesn't work, or if it does, what did I learn? Failure is just that. It's the stuff that you learn from the stuff that you try. It is not who you are. You're not bad because something you did failed. All you have to do is pay attention and notice what happens. I also didn't want to be in a situation where I was asking people to do things for me. Because first off, that would be, I would become a bottleneck, and I would have to have all the ideas. So one of the things that I did, and I encourage you to do with your colleagues, is to invite them to bring you ideas, and then you enable those ideas. It's not that you have to say, I really want to do this really cool blog, but rather say, I'm here to help you make whatever idea you want happen, and come to me with your idea, and we'll turn it into what it needs to be. This quote, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the immensity of the sea, is the philosophy. And even more than that, I believe, it is important for us to find ways for our colleagues to experience a creative outlet through these things, because they're fun things. I mean, we wouldn't be here if the idea of these projects wasn't in some part rewarding and fun. It's just a fun place to play. So I got this sort of like aha moment from reading about one of our animal keepers who blogged for us. And she had two blogs. She had the Animal Keeper blog, which was her professional blog, and then she had her personal blog, which was totally unrelated to the museum. And I read both. And one of the things that she said on her personal blog about blogging for the Animal Keepers was this: I used to struggle with finding ideas for blog posts and motivation to write them. Now I usually have 2 or 3 ideas going on at once, and I really enjoy doing it. I have the freedom to just put whatever I want out there, unpolished, imperfect, here, now, fluid, changing, open, honest, for real. Everything. I'm not pitching anything, I'm not pimping anything, I'm creating art and sharing thoughts and jokes and stories, and have no thought or intimidation of walking any lines between any consequences, because there are no lines. I am established there. I am safe there. That's how she felt about her work blog. She didn't feel that way about her personal blog. And whenever you have colleagues that feel that way about their projects, they create awesome stuff. And so that is the goal, is to have a person have their project be creatively fulfilling like that. Whenever you get to a point where you actually have an idea that you want to enable, and I encourage you again to winnow it down, make it something small, make it something fulfilling. I go through a period I call handhold and then handoff. And I wanted to kind of share 2 examples of what that handholding looks like. So Richard is an entomologist at the museum, and he loves photography, and he loves bugs. And we have a butterfly house, and he takes pictures of the butterflies. So we created a Flickr account for him called the Butterfly Keeper, and he would post his pictures of butterflies and talk to people about them. And he was he learned Flickr in about 2 minutes. It just wasn't a whole lot of hand-holding necessary. Okay, this is a project from one of our teachers, Trish, and it was called Name That Zoom. And Trish was on the floor, and she noticed that people were really big into this USB dermoscope that we had that magnified things 200 times. And so she said, could we do something like this online? And so we created a game called Name That Zoom. And we would tweet, on your mark, get set, name that Zoom, and people would look at the zoomed in picture and try to guess what it was. And it was really cool, and there was a lot of pickup, and you would have to field like dozens, if not over 100 guesses in the course of like an hour, and facilitate all that. And it was really overwhelming for her. And so Trish and I sat for a year, over a year actually. I would sit right next to her at her desk, and we would play Name That Zoom together, and handhold and handhold and handhold until she was comfortable enough to do it by herself. So some of these projects that we do, not that big of a deal for me. Other projects require a lot of investment. But when I hand off, I trust that person completely, which is what Erin was talking about with her blog. She felt completely trusted. In fact, our social media policy was, if you use common sense, if it gives you pause, and if you mess up, I'll have your back. That was the policy. And that's how it got to places where people felt like they could really take risks and do things. So I want to end with a story of Experiment, and how I feel like it sort of articulates sort of how this culture has shifted in little steps along the way. Experiment was something that I did at the end of 2008, early 2009. I have this sort of love-hate relationship with New Year's resolutions. And at this particular year, New Year's resolutions? And at this particular year, I was feeling a little snarky. And so I invited people to suggest resolutions for me and then vote them, and I would do the top 12. And so that's what happened. So I got all these different kinds of resolutions. Some of them were a little kinder than others. And I mapped them across the year, and I invited people to do them with me and to blog about it. So like the very first one, which was poorly timed, was to eat 100% raw diet.
For the whole month?
For the whole month.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. And what happened was the 6 people that decided to do that experiment with me were my colleagues at the museum. They were pinhookers. And this was us juicing for lunch one day. And we went throughout the whole year. I made it 9 days, by the way, just so you know.
Let me tell you, she loves to cook.
I do love to cook. My first meal was onion rings and hot dogs. But we had a dozen of projects, obviously, and hundreds of people participated. It was a really cool, fun experience. But it wasn't really work, but it was. Also, we were studying, we were understanding community, we were understanding technology. And then a little bit later, I had this thought. I had met a scientist who was really neat. Sort of part of my job is to meet scientists, see how they might work with the museum. And I thought, I wonder if we could do an experiment with the scientist. And so I asked her what she thought, and we created this experiment called Experiment Mood. And it was, we would text you 5 times a day and ask you the same question, rate your mood 1 low to 10 high. And we would collect that information and visualize it for you on a website where it'd show you your week over, your month, your mood over the week or over the month or over the day, and in the context of the whole community as well. Blog about mood and emotion and positive psychology, see what it would be like. And it turned out really well. This is the scientist here, Frances. It turned out really well. I think we got about 18,000 mood data points for her over the course of a month. And for a social psychologist, their ends are usually 200 or 300, not thousands. But here's what she said after having her experience. She said, the rigorous and fast-paced setting of academia can rarely provide a sort of experimental scratch pad that is ultimately generative for new hypotheses and methods of inquiry. Experiment can provide generative experiences for scientists, where the flexible interaction with participants allows for potentially new hypotheses to form. Experiment is as important for scientists as it is for citizens, with new parties walking away with new ideas. What we realized was that academic rigor and the world of scientists created a way for them. The current state of the academy, let's say, is that they have to know their question before they get funding or ever see the data to ask it. And so that limits scientists in ever getting to really play with data. And what we were able to do with Experiment was generate lots of not particularly rigorous but really playful data. So they could play with that and then maybe have some ideas and come up with a more rigorous question to ask and study in their labs. It became like a totally new role for a science center to have, work with its local scientists to help them generate new knowledge. And other science centers heard about this and jumped on board and started experimenting. We received a National Science Foundation grant to do Experiment, and now we host them. We generate thousands, tens of thousands of data for social scientists all over the world, actually. You can experiment too if you go to science.experiment.com. And it's actually making its way on the floor of our museum. We're prototyping exhibits that are born digital, and we have these digital experiences. This is a adult-only ball pit, which is so cool. And it is because we had this great experience with having confessionals online, and so we're seeing the impact of these activities on the floor of our space. So just to end with a thought from Richard Hammond. Anybody know this guy? Nobody ever does. He's got a great talk. It's called You and Your Research. He's an interesting guy. He was the very first computer scientist at Bell Labs. And he had an interesting problem. And that was he didn't know who to sit with at lunch. Because at Bell Labs, all the physicists would sit together and all the chemists would sit together and so on. And he didn't have any other computer scientists to sit with. So he had to come up with a coping mechanism for that. And he did. He would sit down at a table where he didn't belong, and he would ask 3 questions. He'd say, what are the most important problems of your field? Are you working on one of them, and why not? And we're going to spend the next 9 months sort of focused on this at our time together. What are the most important problems in the field of library right now? And are you working on one of them through ILEADU or through your other things? What are you doing? Because we all know that if we don't turn our focus to the important things, we'll spend time doing other stuff. And I think also I want to say that it has been my experience with all of this stuff. Let's say that you look at your current set of things. Maybe you don't even know what the hard problems are yet. Maybe you do. And you say, wait a minute, I'm not working on those hard problems. Just like I was showing you with the weight loss and each one of these examples, we're always only ever a second away from making a choice that changes something. It's all in our perspective. And that is truly perfect. Bring something to me and I'll show you how a perspective can be changed in one choice. And so that's where we are. And if we aren't working on the hard problems, we can quickly change to make choices so that we are. So that is my talk. These are a bunch of people that inspire me. And don't think we have time for questions, but we do have team time, so you can ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you.